To understand the full horror of Rembrandt Scholarship of the moment, we need to look no further than the back and the front of this enormous catalogue from the Getty Museum. The leading light of this is Peter Schackborn, late of the Rijksmuseum. His judgment is so incredible that I've made a whole video about these two drawings. They're essentially the same pose, the same light. The lady is quite recognizable as Rembrandt's mistress, Hendrika Schloffels. And as far as I'm concerned, he's clearly looking for the pose for his famous painting of Bathsheba. And Peter Schackborn actually admits that the drawings are incredibly alike. They're on the same paper. The techniques are almost identical. It is stunning in the most dreadfully negative way. He's spread confusion where I find Rembrandt the most straightforward, simple, direct, truthful, wonderful artist. Very varied, and I can explain the variation. He really wasn't that much good at making things up. And yet, since Benesch, scholars have uniformly described him as having the most brilliant imagination. He was observing from life. He wasn't inventing anything. He draws two bowls of pottage because he sees two in the mirror, but there should only be one. Rembrandt is very down to earth. He's mainly interested in observing reality. He's not in the least bit interested in inventing. This man takes no notice whatsoever of previous scholars' judgments. Nearly all of this is arguing with Benesch, but he doesn't take any notice of Rembrandt's contemporaries either. It's as if he's never set foot in a life class. And I can vouch that he has met one artist because I've spent a whole evening with him, taking him through my as yet unpublished book on Rembrandt. That was in 1978. At the time, Schackborn couldn't find any rebutting arguments. In fact, he agreed that Lute had proved more or less the same thing with Rembrandt's landscape drawings, because Lute, 300 years after the event, actually identified the places where some of the drawings were made. And since then, he's been busy de-attributing a lot of the drawings that I regard as masterpieces. But it's just incredible that somebody who is on the verge of madness has dominated a scholarship for so long. It is just incredible. He has no eye, no common sense, and absolute disaster. Houbraken has given us a very long description of Rembrandt and his students. He obviously knew his students. He was a fellow Amsterdammer, and although his notes were not published until 1719, he gives us what must have been the gossip of Amsterdam at the time of Rembrandt. And he tells us a lot of useful stuff that the present scholars have entirely ignored. In fact, for instance, he tells us that Rembrandt's drawings of female models, who he regards as a wonderful subject matter. First of all, he says that Rembrandt's choice of models was very difficult to understand. And second, they're so pitiful, his drawings, that they're not worth mentioning. And they're often repellent. Now, all those things should prepare us to see Rembrandt's drawing of his own mistress as not particularly attractive, but still useful as an indication of what kind of artist Rembrandt is. Shatbourne has been top dog of Rembrandt drawings for a very long time. He spent the first part of his career in the Rijksprinten cabinet as the Rembrandt specialist. And after that, he was invited to the Getty Museum as a guest scholar. And from there, he and a few acolytes produced an exhibition and a catalogue, which has been the most recent publication from Rembrandt scholars, and therefore we can take it that it is the standard teaching. So the catalogue is described as Rembrandt and his students telling the difference. And in the vast majority of cases, there is no difference. He is taking two drawings which are accepted in Benish's catalogue as both being by Rembrandt and giving us a completely unbelievable reason for changing that view. It is astonishing how Rembrandt scholars and the director of the Getty Museum have accepted these entirely arbitrary reasons for changing. In very many cases, for instance, he is dismissing drawings of Rembrandt's mistress, Hendrika Schloffels. Now, Hendrika has a rather round tummy in almost all cases, and in some special cases, like for what's called the arrow holder, she has a sling round her wrist and a rope to some hook in the ceiling, presumably, that helps her hold her hand up for Rembrandt to draw, so that she's not straining to do it. And we'll see that sling and rope in quite a number of the cases that Shatbourne has dismissed. As they're not very good drawings, we should bear in mind what Houbraken said about Rembrandt's drawings. So we should expect some pretty lousy drawings. Houbraken was not a fool, and a lot of these drawings we would all find difficult to accept, but for the fact that they are of his mistress. They are in the intimate setting of his bedroom, and some of them are incredibly beautiful. One of them particularly, which has been dismissed, I have singled out as perhaps Rembrandt's most important drawing from a naked live model. Here we have Rembrandt's preparation for one of his most famous etchings. The drawing is not that great, but it's always been accepted as a Rembrandt. And if you look carefully, you will see that the shading on her back is almost identical to the drawing. Rembrandt was not all that great at life class. Sometimes he hits the spot wonderfully. At other times, they're fairly ordinary drawings. Rembrandt's mistress, Hendrika Schloffels, is very recognizable, although she was pregnant at one stage. She had a child by him, and obviously from there one would expect some drawings with a round tummy. In fact, she seems to have had a round tummy nearly always. It's only the etching of what's called the arrow holder that suggests that she was very lean. I think, in fact, that Rembrandt has tidied her up a bit for the etching. I mean, it's interesting to look at this etching, which has been through 4 or 5 phases of reworking, and yet to look at that hand theoretically holding an arrow. In fact, it is a hand held up by a rope, and you can see the sleeve round her wrist, just so that she can hold that pose without problems, without strain, for as long as he needed. How this man has been able to persuade people that a Rembrandt drawing that has been signed on the back by Raven, surely if he was claiming it for himself, he would have signed it on the front. But no, he signed it on the back. And from there, Shatbourne's actually prepared to say this gives us the possibility of finding a whole raft of drawings. No other drawing by him is actually known. So I mean, we're just in cloud cuckoo land. If there's one quality which I see in Rembrandt, which I think defines him most, it is his truthfulness, his insistence on his own experience of life. What I've said about his descent from the cross, how he is pushing his own truthfulness to experience against Rubens's drama, is wonderful. And it goes on and on. Look at his drawings of Diana, the virgin goddess who went hunting. I mean, it's a joke, but he is showing what a model actually looks like. She wasn't a very good model for Diana. It turns out that Rembrandt is so different to the modern masters that they have promoted that the bulk of Rembrandt scholars have decided it's better to bury him and save their own reputation. Peter Schackborn has been top dog of Rembrandt drawings for very many years. So we can be pretty sure we're dealing with the most recent thoughts about Rembrandt's drawings. Now, Michael Brandt, the director of the Getty Museum, has described this catalogue as stunning and momentous. I agree about the stunning, because Peter Schackborn has reduced the generally accepted number in Benish, which was about 1,500 drawings, to 500. I actually think that Benish badly underestimated, was too restrictive. I believe in about 2,200 drawings. So I was definitely stunned. And what I want to tell you is that I think that this man has gone wild. He's been top dog for so long that it's rather gone to his head. He doesn't listen to Rembrandt himself or Rembrandt's contemporaries or to Benish, who wrote the 6-volume catalogue. He's gone off on his own, and the result is stunning and horribly momentous, because it has affected the direction of art for a fairly long time. When I was a student, Rembrandt was by far the most revered of the old masters. Now, students don't dare look at him. They don't know whether they're looking at a Rembrandt or at a drawing made by somebody they've never heard of before. It's so incredible what he has done and what he's been able to do. It's, as far as I'm concerned, it's a terrible judgment on Rembrandt scholarship generally, that he has been allowed to get away with what I regard as murder. How does Schackborn go about this amazing change? By a wildly illogical series of misjudgments and what I regard as complete nonsense. He recently found a genuine Rembrandt drawing with the name Raven on the back. Now, nobody had heard of Raven as a painter or as a student of Rembrandt. As far as I'm concerned, if he was trying to claim that that was his drawing, he would have signed it on the front, not on the back. But Schackborn, quite illogically, takes the view that this can give us an insight into a whole range of Raven's drawings, none of which were known before. And they're all Rembrandts. I mean, it's just completely crazy. He's prepared to look at a drawing which has previously been always attributed to Rembrandt, and traditionally it's known as a drawing of his mistress, Hendrika Schloffels, quite recognizable. And if you look at these two heads, of course, anyone can tell they're by the same person, not Schackborn. He finds that her cap is drawn with too academic a style for Rembrandt. I have always taken that coil for Hendrika's hairstyle. Otherwise, they're obviously exactly the same man. And in fact, when you look at the whole drawing, it's perfectly clear they're done on the same paper, they're drawn from the same pose, in the same light, and probably in Rembrandt's bedroom. Now, can we imagine Rembrandt allowing this unknown fellow into his bedroom to share in drawing from his own naked mistress? Not very likely, I don't think. This whole catalogue is full of equally unrealistic and absurd ideas, particularly on drawings preparation for etchings. Apart from Raven, the main beneficiary of Chatborne's misjudgments has been a well-known painter, student of Rembrandt, but an extremely poor draftsman, in fact. We have got drawings of his, which are not in the least bit like Rembrandt. Very quick sketch made by Rembrandt of the Finding of Moses, of which Ball has made a painting. And it's a very bad painting. And if I'm right in saying that Rembrandt made it as part of his instruction to Ball, then Ball really didn't get lesson at all. His version of Finding of Moses is an absurd joke. But the drawing is not his, that is perfectly clear. Quick sketch as it is, I look at the lady squatting in shock, and I think that's pure Rembrandt. I mean, nobody else draws like that. And it conveys a sense of worry about the servant falling in or the baby being drowned extremely well. It's pure Rembrandt, perfectly clearly characteristic of him. You'll find the Ball's box of drawings in the Rijksprinten cabinet is now full of really remarkably good Rembrandt drawings, because if Ball could do one, why couldn't he do a lot more? And of course, in this way, you can reduce 1,500 to 500 very quickly. And Chatborne has chosen to build his reputation on just that. In fact, I've had a letter from another eminent Rembrandt scholar telling me I'm going in the wrong direction, that to increase the number of drawings is just complicating the situation, that the fewer drawings there are, the more chance there is of understanding him well. Well, with my 2,200, I am very much closer to Rembrandt's own statements, the statements of his contemporaries, and the judgments of scholars since. It is Chatborne who is way, way out. And he, combined with his lack of common sense, he doesn't seem to have an eye at all. At present, Rembrandt scholars are using a large number of students' paintings, dated usually about 1640 or so, to create what they call the Iconography of Rembrandt and his school. They are interpreting the various viewpoints of the students who would have been arranged around the group, as in a life class, and therefore obviously getting different views of the same thing. They say that they are so inspired by Rembrandt's drawings or his etching that they went on to paint large, important paintings, some of which are, for instance, are in the Metropolitan Museum. They're interpreting that as the iconography of Rembrandt and his school. Well, I'd interpret them as simply different views of the same group that Rembrandt drew so many times. I mean, it is crazy and must be stopped. I have spent my life as a practicing sculptor. I do a lot of drawing, and I've spent a great deal of my time trying to correct Rembrandt scholars, because my own values in art are very much based on what I see in Rembrandt. And I have published in important magazines and I've had the backing of very many scholars, including Gombrich, of course, and the Rembrandt scholars have taken absolutely no notice. One can say that the scholarship of Rembrandt's drawings has deteriorated enormously in the time between when I published in the Burlington magazine, February 77, and now with Chatbourne leading the monstrous crusade to kill Rembrandt off, it would seem. When Michael Brand described the catalogue as stunning and momentous, he may well be using light phrases to say exactly the same as what I'm saying here. Here we see Chatbourne shooting from a hip in that Getty catalogue. He's telling the difference when there really is no difference. All these drawings, or nearly all of them, were included by Benish in his large catalogue. And they're all much more obviously by Rembrandt than by the very many different named students. How Chatbourne has the cheek to attribute the right-hand side to Van Eyck, when it's quite clearly the same man drawing on both sides, both by Rembrandt, both in Benish. Both in Benish and both obviously by Rembrandt. Rembrandt has taken the right-hand side one home and added the wash rather carefully. But the rest is quite clearly the same marketplace, the same event. Another example, both in Benish, attributed to Rembrandt, and the right-hand side, in this instance, attributed to Bol, attributed to Fabricius on the right, but quite obviously by Rembrandt, and in Benish. Two drawings, both in Benish, attributed to Rembrandt, and here attributed the right-hand side to Drost. Really silly. The same again. Hoogstraten on the right shows that he was present in the barn with Rembrandt and the mirror for the adoration. Hoogstraten on the right is correct. Another drawing attributed to Fabricius. The architecture is very typical of Rembrandt. We don't have many Fabricius drawings to compare with this. The right-hand side attributed to Jan Victors for a change. Completely absurd. It's in Benish. It's typical Rembrandt, drawing lot in the center from life and the rest from imagination. This time he's done rather well with the angel's hand. Both in Benish as Rembrandt, and the right-hand side, now attributed to Bol, is by far the nicer drawing, particularly the Magdalene figure, much better drawn than on the left-hand side. Two Rembrandt drawings here attributed to Raven, whose drawings we don't know otherwise. As you can see, correcting the great is not a rewarding business, but if there's anyone out there who's prepared to take on this onerous task, I am here to teach the groundwork of how to tell a real Rembrandt from a huge number of possible students of his. The thing about Rembrandt is he didn't have a workshop. He had students, and on the whole, they weren't taught to imitate the master's style in drawing. They had their own style, and Chatbourne has simply spread confusion. In defining what I love about Rembrandt, I believe I'm defining qualities of art that have lasted remarkably well. Rembrandt's drawing was admired by his contemporaries and admired by a large group of artists ever since then. Those are values which I hold very dear and which have been destroyed by Rembrandt scholarship.